everyone, and welcome to Triggered. Today we have a assortment of guests, and we're going to be talking about religion as a general subject. Now, I said this to the group, and I'll say it again. We do not plan for this to be a debate format, but given the nature of these conversations, it's likely that it will devolve into something of an argument. So we're going to start off with the basics, though, and we're just going to kind of take a look at what each person's experience has been with religion. So let's start off with the most interesting person, Pat.
Oh, well, I'm glad I'm the most interesting. Oh, I don't know.
So let's
I'm currently a non-denominational Christian. I like studying the occult, so that's pretty cool. Went to Catholic school for 11 years. Let's see. I've been agnostic, atheistic, I guess other labels in between that. I've been a nihilist, and I'm sure some other stuff I can't think of off the top of my head.
Okay, cool. Then let's hear about Lenny. Lenny has a pretty interesting story too.
Okay. My parents are very strong atheists, so I was raised very atheistic. However, it was traditional in Belgium to go to like the Catholic sort of early sacraments, like the First Communion and baptism. So I was baptized in the Catholic Church, and I also did my First Communion in the Catholic Church. I did not get conformed in the Catholic Church because at that time I was very strongly atheistic and I didn't want anything to do with it. I was very strongly anti-theist, and I think 2 years ago I changed my opinion and I returned to Catholic Church, and then I left the Catholic Church again, went back to atheism, and I have pretty much been sort of going in between atheism and Christianity for some time. So I have some sympathies to Christianity. At this moment I consider myself Christian, but I'm not a strong one at all. I'm weak, or whatever you call it. Like the weak theist, or whatever you call it. I don't know. Yeah, that's my story, I suppose.
Okay. And Val, I don't think you've ever told us your experience with religion, so let's hear it. Val?
Yep, sorry. Yeah, my dad was Catholic, but my mother was non-religious. So for the most part, my upbringing was pretty secular. Never really subscribed to any particular religion. Never really cared to.
Okay. And then finally we have Gothic.
Well, I came from a Catholic household. My dad believes that the Earth is 6,300 years old to this day. So I was brought up as a Catholic, had a First Communion and so on. However, my parents don't really, despite being quite evangelical Catholics, they didn't really care about me being an atheist. So they know I don't believe in what they believe and whatever. So I was brought up in a Catholic church, had to attend Catholic services and so on, but became, well, a non-believer around when I was 11.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so that's the Triggered cast, but now we have our special guest who's joining us again, who joined us last week. We have IntrovertedSmiles. Smiles?
Well, basically, my parents were Muslim, and I was raised with it, never really practiced it. And throughout my life, though, I looked into Christianity, Judaism, and all sorts of religions, and I decided to practice Islam. I became really religious in Islam, and when I started thinking about it by myself, isolating myself from the community, I slowly shifted to an agnostic theist, and then I went to agnostic deist, and then I finally became agnostic atheist, and not until recently, actually, that I am pretty sure that I'm anti-theist atheist now. Yeah, that's my story in a nutshell.
All right, and so I guess I should probably also give a bit of myself. I was raised in the Catholic Church all my life. My parents were both Catholic. Well, actually, it's more accurate to say that my mother was deist, and she just went along with what my father said. So then I went into the church. I was pretty religious, you might say middle of the ground religious for a while. And then sometime around maybe maybe ninth grade, I decided that I was going to actually look at some of the claims that I believed for so long in my life. And I remember there was a distinct point in, I think, seventh grade, where there was a piece of evidence, I say in quotes because I don't necessarily believe it anymore, that was on the wall in one of our schools. And what it was, if you don't know, in the Catholic faith, there's a lot of these miracles that they tout out, and one of them was like, if you haven't heard, like the toast with the Jesus's face on it, or the Holy Mary. I don't remember which one it was.
I don't think the toast is.
I don't know if it was Catholic.
Yeah. Official Catholic.
Anyway, that's
miracle.
that's aside the point. The point is, this miracle specifically was coming from. There was supposedly somewhere in, I think it was the Middle East, where in an actual ceremony the blood had turned into real blood that was found in that area, and the host had turned into real skin that was found in that area, and they touted this as proof. And so I remember saying to my teacher in seventh grade, "This is why I believe, because there's clear proof here." And they said to me, you know, that's not good enough. That's not why you should believe it. You should believe it based on faith. So I remember thinking that was weird, and I did investigating after that, and eventually I became an atheist. And then for a long time I was an anti-theist, and then recently I've become an apatheist. And what that means is I no longer really care for the most part, with a few exceptions. But I generally don't. I generally operate on a live and let live basis now, so I've moved on from that. But we're going to kind of move into ideology and religion, and then I kind of want to get into a little bit of. We'll see if anybody has any objections to what anyone else has said yet. So I'm sure everyone has noticed that with the trend of the regressives lately, that there's a clear line between being an ideologue and being religious. Or sorry, there's not a clear line. It's a very blurry line. And I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. Where do you think are there any ideologies out there that strike you as being religions that aren't really classified as religions today? Anybody?
Well, I think we know the obvious one.
Well, yeah.
Which one?
Val?
Freemasonry.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that? I thought Freemasonry was considered a religion.
Yeah, I totally consider it a religion. Lots of people do.
Oh,
That's not what we're talking
okay.
about. I think maybe people are saying communism?
Mm.
No,
The biggest comparison I see is, the comparison between religion and feminism specifically.
Yeah, well, I mean, the
Typically,
feminism and
intersectional.
Marxism. Yeah, feminism and Marxism are the two big ones that I was thinking of when you said that.
And I'm seeing a lot of confusion on this issue. So can we clearly define what our religion is, so then we don't have any
Yeah.
further arguments? I think
Good
that's
call,
a sensible
Gothic.
rule.
That's a good idea. So let's do that. So for my purposes, I'll say that a religion is a set of beliefs. Actually, let's go with the dictionary definition to start. So let's see. The definition of a religion is a cultural system of behaviors and practices, mythologies, worldviews, sacred texts, holy places, ethics, and societal organization that relate humanity to what an anthropologist has called an order of existence. So that's what Wikipedia defines a religion as. Is there anything that you guys think, like Marxism, feminism, or like Pat mentioned Freemasonry, or any of these other strange ideologies that you might consider being a religion based on that definition?
I don't think feminism is a religion. I think it's a very strongly held ideology.
Same here.
I think, to be honest, for me, religion does have to contain a supernatural component. Otherwise, I tend not to view it as a religion.
I think that's a good point.
And so, even though you could claim, well, the feminists or the crazy, I don't know, just crazy ideologues that they're like, oh, they're acting like religious people. That's entirely possible. That doesn't mean their ideology is a religion. It just means they're acting like a certain set of people who also have, a religion. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a religion. I mean, you could argue, I suppose, that there are parallels between some religious faiths and or at least the way they act and how the way the feminists act. But I don't think feminism itself is a religion. And
I just
sorry.
wanted to bring up as well. I think there's a lot of confusion when it comes to Buddhism and Hinduism because every time I bring up, Buddhism is recognized as a religion, someone corrects me and says, no, it's not. It's actually a philosophy more than a religion. And Hinduism, they say, it branches out to different beliefs. Like Sikhism came from Hinduism. Therefore, Hinduism cannot be classified as a religion. So I get that a lot. I don't know if anybody wants to agree or disagree.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Actually, the point of philosophy versus religion, I think, is interesting because I've actually heard that from particularly hardcore religious people. Specifically, I've heard it from creationists. I think is the only person I've ever heard it from, saying that, like, for example, Christianity might be a philosophy, or any other religion might be a philosophy. It's a strange. I think it's a rectangle square situation, if you know what I mean. I think that it's a religion is a philosophy and a religion, but it's not only a philosophy. If that makes sense? It's a religion, and I don't know. Does that make sense?
It confuses me a little bit because I do hear some people say, I pray to the Buddha, and I hear some Buddhists say, no, you cannot pray to the Buddha, literally. And I don't know, I'm just confused about it.
I think there are different
Maybe a good way
schools of
to
Buddhism.
separate this is the way Luciferianism and Satanism is separated. So the Luciferian doesn't believe that Lucifer exists. They believe that he would be an archetype. And to my knowledge, there aren't really sacred documents for philosophical Luciferians, unlike people that might, I don't know, belong to the Church of Satanism from San Francisco, founded
All
by
right.
Anton LaVey.
Wait. So okay, that's what I was thinking. So wait, are you saying that the Luciferians are the LaVeyans, or are they different?
I'm saying that, oh yeah, the LaVeyan Church, they don't actually believe in spiritual entities,
Yeah, that's
but
why
they do ritualistic practices. And then there are other Luciferians that don't believe Lucifer exists, have a Luciferian philosophy, but do no rituals. And then there are those who believe that entities exist and try to commune with them through rituals and ceremonies. So the question would then be, are the Luciferians that practice rituals a religion, and are the Luciferians that don't practice any rituals but merely have a philosophy, are they also religious?
All right. Well, I think we'll come back to that, but just want to bring attention to the fact that Alan has joined us. So, Alan, we're talking about religion, obviously. Do you want to Can you give us a little bit of a brief rundown of what your experience has been with religion in general?
Yeah, I've studied in a Catholic college, and what happens in a Catholic college is that you have to spend 6 months, roughly, about 5 classes on religion. And what they do is that they put you to study the major religions first, and then they try to teach you about Catholicism. And the main issue that I've had with this is that most of the Catholic teachers are just picked by the what they call the dom of the college, which is actually some kind of bishop, which is an authority for my state in religion, in Catholicism at least. So it was really cool that when you had to work with all of the religions, there was this assignment that I had to do, which you pick one of the major religions in the world and you have to make an essay about it. And the religion that I picked was Ubanda, which wasn't one that I knew the least. So it was a good opportunity to know more about a religion that I knew very little. And to my surprise is that Ubanda it's very popular on the southern part of USA, where there was a lot of Haitians in I think the swamp area of Louisiana that practice a lot of voodoo rituals, and most of them are a branch of Ubanda. So what happened here in Brazil with Banda is that there's a lot of rituals as well involved, and there's voodoo, but the things that are taught in Ubanda are mostly not very well known from the for the people, because in Ubanda they tell that if you want to make voodoo to someone that is not evil, it will come back to you twice as hard. So there's a lot of ethics involved in Ubanda, in theory at least. That I'm not talking about practical things here, because everyone knows that when you apply a theory in practice, it kind of becomes a little bit more uh, skewed, so to say. So
Mhm.
what happens in theory is that if you make a voodoo ritual for someone that does not deserve it, it hits them and then hits you twice as hard. So it was kind of interesting to know an alternate reality of a religion that I knew very little about, and through my skeptical lens, and I was just I didn't know much about it. I just thought that it was just a bunch of voodoo bullshit of rich sacrifice of animals that they deem to tell that it's a sacrifice for the gods. And most of the gods that are in Ubanda are actually Catholic saints. So they have their versions of the Catholic saints in their own history, which happens a lot throughout history. You see, the Romans adapted all the Greek gods and just renamed them for the sake of being Roman. So that happened as well in a lot of religions, together with the Ubanda religion, and they adapted a lot of the Catholic saints to their own, uh, let's say, pantheons. So, for example, you have what we call Oshun, which is a god of war, and he's essentially a version of I forgot the name in English. The saint that battles a dragon.
St. Michael. Oh no
Yeah,
no no.
it's not Saint Michael.
Saint
It's
George. Saint George.
Saint George. Yeah,
George, that's
Oshun
right.
is basically Ubanda version of Saint George, because he
So,
battles a dragon and he's a warrior, and Oshun is basically that. It's a version
so
of Saint.
what are are you what's your like position on religion now, Alan? Like,
Oh, I think that it's kind of like this. If you want to practice a religion, as long as it does not put the rights of other people into your own way, you can practice whatever the hell you want.
okay, so you're
I was
between
a
then.
Yeah, I was a non-Catholic practitioner, so to speak. You can say that I have Catholic raisins, and I didn't went to the church much, but I believed in God and so. But the more that I learned on religion, the less I started to believe on the good part of religion. So I just stand away from it, and I consider myself an atheist, so to speak. I don't really believe in religion. I believe in self. I believe in humans, and I believe that humans can worship whatever the hell they want as long as it brings them good, more good than harm. I mean, that's all good. But the problem is that when you take into such an extreme, for example, we're hearing a lot about Islam, but we got to understand that Islam is a religion that was founded at least 1,000 years ago. It's a very old religion that didn't get reformed into modern world society, because it's been mostly practiced in subhuman societies like the Middle East. So when it came to Europe, it was obvious that a cultural clash was about to happen.
All right. I think that while this has been very interesting, I think that we need to kick it into overdrive, and it's been a fun idea to not argue, but I think to make this conversation much more interesting, we need to start arguing a little bit. So I want to hear from Smiles, because I believe that I think it was this video that him and Pat were having an argument on. And I want to hear specifically about you've recently, like you said, become an anti-theist. So what is it that's changed that position for you?
Well, I just want to say, first of all, I heard when he was saying Islam is less than 1,000 years old. It's actually 1,400 years old, and the thing about it being in a quote unquote subhuman area, it's just that Islam, it brings that type of culture to its place. But because people look at it and say, well, they're living in poor areas, they're not living in areas that are developed, we have to give Islam more of a chance. But the problem is that
I
it's
agree with you. I never
it,
said that. I
yeah,
agree with you in that you don't have to give it a chance. I'm just explaining that Islam was born into this area and was developed there. So it's not like Islam came into Europe and then flourished and then became a more advanced religion, so to speak. It stayed there. Because for multiple times when Islam tried to go into other civilized areas, it just brought destruction. What other religion has so much animosity towards each other than Islam? All other religions have soldiers of faith that basically defend their tenets against Islam. You have against Buddhism, you have against Judaism, today with Israel, you have against Catholicism. All other religions hate Islam. Why don't Catholics make wars against the Buddhists? Why don't the Catholics make wars against Judaism, so to speak, the people that worship Judah and shit? Because that doesn't happen. Because Islam is it's all about a religion that its core tenet is to destroy all other religions. While the other religions are more lax, so to speak. They allow other religions to exist as long as they do not hurt them, I think.
Right, I agree with that. I agree with that. But I was just pointing out, yeah, because of the nature of Islam, it came to correct everybody else, you know. And when you have that attitude, it doesn't matter like what area you come from or what area you're gonna go to. It's just gonna simply destroy with its bad ideas. And of course, there are, you know, not all Muslims. We have to say that, make that clear. Many Muslims, they just don't know the reality of what they're practicing, and they're just practicing. But going back to Triggered's question, he said, "What? I had an argument with Pat," and I actually don't recall the argument. I'm sorry to say.
No, it wasn't really an argument at all, and it wasn't about the topic of the video. I believe.
Oh.
We can talk about it after the show what Guinness is talking about because I don't think it's going to add much to the conversation.
Okay, I wasn't
Nothing to do
familiar with it.
religion.
Sorry, I thought it was related. My bad.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so let's move on.
Yeah, so like what made me think of more anti-theists is just I truly believe that it's just, you know, if God were to exist in a monotheistic form for all people to follow, and this is a question I have for all the creationists out there, is that, you know, what happens after we recognize that there is a monotheistic God or a theistic God? What do you want people to do? That's my point, and that's why I tend to think no, it really is man-made. It really is things that people made up, and I know that will offend some people here, but it's just what I believe. That's why I am against theism in
I
particular.
don't think anyone's
That's why.
offended here, but
Yeah, I think
It's
offended is
fine,
the wrong word.
I don't think you'll offend anyone here. I mean, yeah, that's a pretty basic, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, any objections to that?
Well, I mean, I think components around religion can definitely be
I'm against
man-made.
enforcing anti-theism. I'm against enforcing the tenet that you can't worship what you want. I'm against the theism because when you do that, you're basically enforcing to others what you believe. And that's essentially as bad as forcing others to believe in your own religion. The lack of religion is also a stance. And when you force to others this stance, it becomes as harmful as if you're enforcing for others your own religion.
That's an interesting point. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Smiles.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna clarify. Like to me, I mean, I have no problem, you know, hanging out with someone who is a theist, and discussing these things. But I'm not gonna, you know, stand down from what I believe. I'm not gonna stand down and, you know, lie to somebody about what they believe. I'm gonna call it out, and I do believe that we should, as a human race, you know, propagate that. We should, you know, get everybody to wake up as best as we can. And I know I understand your stance is that, you know, you should live and let live, but what you understand is that people, they waste so much time and they just waste so much of their life worshiping, and I just think it would be a great step as a human civilization.
Let me ask you a very important question right now. So let's say that the religion actually loses more space in the world. Let's say in about 50 years. Okay, so let's say that a half of the Catholics that would worship God in a near future for 50 years, they do not worship God anymore. So let's say that 50% is not religious because we are discussing this and we're bringing up talk to enforce anti-theism. Okay? So what happens is, what do you think those 50% people that don't have God anymore are going to believe? What do you think that they are going to spend their money into? I mean, I agree that the church has a lot of bad practices involved, but I don't think that if you enforce an anti-theist belief, that it's going to help people uh, spend their money better. Because at the very least, you got to admit that being religious at least enforces you into a core beliefs that puts you into some kind of threat. So uh, when you enforce this, uh, stupid people, let's say like this, let's put it bluntly, are going to be stupid anyways.
I think that it's an interesting point that like these cognitive dissonances, the way that a person, and obviously feel free the people who don't agree with this to object to it, but the people who can believe something that is obviously incongruous with what they already believe, with being very smart and very intellectual, and then still being a creationist or something like that. I think those kinds of tendencies are human tendencies, and what I mean by that is that it's almost if you were to say, and I don't think Smiles is saying enforce anti-theism, I think he's saying encourage it, and I would say that like even if you do that, even if you encourage the idea that you make people more against the establishment, they're going to find something to replace what they were using originally to be pig-headed about. They're going to find, and my example would be the rise of the regressives. People will be pig-headed about something. They will find something to be cognitively completely out of touch with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I agree with that 100%. I agree that even atheists that they become dogmatic about something. They
Yeah.
they find something like feminism, radical feminism. Let's just put it like that. Of course, but the question I would ask is what's more harmful, radical feminism or radical Islam, for example? Just pointing out feminism, like we clarified earlier, it's an ideology. It's something. It's not like a set of beliefs where people kill each other over it. That's
Mm.
all I'm pointing out.
Well, that's also interesting because it brings up the point that Gothic and I were discussing earlier about moderates, and this probably, I think everybody will probably disagree with me on this position, that I generally don't have a problem with moderates of a religion. Um, and Gothic, I see you made a point in the chat. We'll get to that in a second. But I don't see much problem generally with moderates because, like I said earlier, I have a general live and let live philosophy, and I also have a principle of benefit of the doubt. So if somebody like if we're going to say that the moderates are actually as bad as the extremists because they end up giving credence to them and they provide a shield for them, well, I take somebody at their word. If and like I said about the people having this innate bias, they're going to find something to be biased about. And I think intensely scrutinizing them and saying that you're actually providing a cover for these people, I don't necessarily think that's true, because I think that even if you were to somehow cure all the people who believe these crazy things and who are moderates and make them non-religious, they're going to find something else to be stupid about, and you're going to start being mad at them for that. They're going to
And
replace it.
I think the biggest fear about atheism is that people tend to bring up the Stalin example. Stalin was an atheist, he was a communist, and people fear that, especially in America. They want to keep their Christian values, their Judeo-Christian values. And I agree. Like there are some moderate religious people that you don't have to really worry about at all.
Hmm.
But what I'm saying is that just because someone promotes the idea or encourages the idea of anti-theism, it's not going to bring about this bloody revolution where people are going to just be violent about something because of their atheism. You know what I'm saying? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and it's definitely not like I mean it's not necessarily the conclusion, but I'm sure that we might have some objections to that. But I think Gothic raised an interesting point in the chat. He says, "I fail to see how dogmatic atheism could possibly exist." So I would say to that, I think you're right definitionally, obviously, because you can't really be dogmatic about something you don't believe. It doesn't really make that much sense. But in terms of people being dogmatic about their ideology which is much more than just their atheism, who are also atheists. Yes, it's very possible, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with it. Like, you're saying also, it has to be an also. Being an atheist by itself, you can't be dogmatic because it doesn't make sense. You have to be also. And that,
No, but you can be dogmatically anti-religion or anti-theist.
yeah, precisely so. I failed to see your point.
Well, I just don't think we're actually disagreeing. I think we're in agreement. But I think that hold on, there was a point that somebody raised earlier. Right, it was the rise of secularism, and it's the fact that we've seen. I mean, I don't know. I raised this point to somebody in my class in college the other day. You know, I used to work with this guy. He would always tell me the Christians are the most persecuted people in the country. This is in Canada. And I always laughed it off, and I still don't think that, but I've started to see that at least some, and some, you know, go ahead and object to this, at least some of the persecution complex is at least warranted, because I see the rise of dogmatic secularism in the West. Not so much in the UK, but in the US, it seems like, or at least in Canada, and I guess I kind of mirror the U.S. as being very similar to Canada, because as my experience, at least in the academic institutions, there's very little religious people, or at least they're not vocal, and the people who are vocal are the non-religious people.
Yeah, I mean, I
see,
just looked. Yeah, I looked up the statistic. It's actually rising in America, but I see a lot of Christians that don't want to make a place for atheists because they're afraid. It's like,
Well, yeah. I mean, I see like in general, I see like kind of attitudes towards Christians being. I mean, we all know that there's this hypocritical double standard that they don't apply to Islam that they will apply to Christianity, and this is what I said to this girl in my class who's a Christian. I said, you know, do you feel like the establishment applies a double standard to you based on the fact that you know you're a moderate, and I have no problem with you as a moderate who doesn't do anything. But then you have somebody like who's in my class, you know, a Muslim girl who has to wear a hijab, and it's like nobody will say anything to her, but they'll have no problem persecuting you for you know having whatever opinions you might have. And it's like I wouldn't say that I wouldn't definitely say that the Christians are the most persecuted people in the country. I would think that's still ridiculous, but I would say that they definitely are starting to get the shorter and shorter end of the stick as time's going on. And it's not necessarily that's a bad thing, but it's the bad thing is that it's being done vindictively and spitefully by the secular community.
I think that stems more from regressivism, from the regressive rather than the secular.
Yeah.
well, what do you mean by like vindictively triggered? I'm not trying to oppose you or anything,
No.
but
What I mean is the secular community has maybe that's not the right word, but let's go with the progressives have a particular disdain towards Christianity, and I think it's a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were raised in Christian households, and they're backlashing against Christianity and trying to take things away from Christians simply because they're angry.
Let me ask you something.
I agree with
that.
Go ahead.
I'm going to ask you guys a very important question here. That it's not actually a question, but more of an affirmation. If you take the population of people that are against Christians, and you correlate this bias that they have against Christians with if they have what we call white hate, as in the self-loathing white people, you're gonna get a really good proportion of people that correlate into these two stances.
Probably. It'd be a big crossover in the Venn diagram.
Yeah. You're gonna see a big crossover that people that are very self-loathing into their race and that actually hate Christians.
If the Europeans that came over to America weren't Protestant, then the Native Americans wouldn't die. Fact.
No, yeah, I don't know about that, but no, in my country, it's I mean, atheism is the standard position. All politicians are atheists, pretty much. I mean, what happens is they punish, for example, they punish the Catholic school for not teaching the children that abortion is a human right. And it's and they're trying to force Catholic doctors to do abortions and euthanasias, and people are. I don't know. It's kind of in my country. It's I don't know. It's very much the it's not. I don't like the word establishment, but it's pretty much the main position. I mean, I think we have about 2% mass attendance per week, or per month, or whatever. It's like Belgians are very atheistic. Maybe that's because of the Second World War. I think that played a big part into it because we got slaughtered like hell 2 times in one decade, in a couple of decades. And ever since the Second World War, I mean, it's been growing more, I suppose, atheistic or whatever.
I would
And
say,
it's interesting.
yeah, and I would say too that like you make a good point because I think that as I've grown in the years, I've noticed that there's this trend in people, not in religious people, in people in general, to be dogmatic about their beliefs. And I don't know. I think I've decided that if you have I'm a multiculturalist and I'm also kind of like a nationalist. So I know that's kind of weird, but what I mean by that is that like I don't think the right answer is let's encourage everybody to be an atheist and that's the best position. If that happens, okay, fine, and that happens on its own, that's fine. But I think that probably what's best for the healthiest society is to have a melting pot of ideas constantly fighting each other peacefully under the same law. That's kind
You
of how
know,
I see it.
you know what's really interesting is that Brazil is tended to be the great father of multiculturalism and multiracial uh, communities living together in harmony,
Mm.
and a lot of people are just mixed breeds of either race. But it's really amazing that we never had so much intern struggle between races and classes before the government started to fuel the fires of it. So we had 8 years of more than 8 years, I'd say. We had a very long period of presidents that never actually took this stance to fuel the wars between races and classes. And now that we have a communist-esque government, we are starting to see it, and we are starting to see them fueling hatred to see white people against black people,
Oh yeah,
women
and
against men.
dude, it's
That
happening here too. It's happening in Canada. It's just started with fucking the president of Tumblr being elected. I mean, for fuck's sakes. But like, I've seen it. What's sad is that I think that my country is headed towards what your country has done and shown to be ineffective, and I think it's unfortunate because, like I said, I think that I see it being effective here to a degree. People are not at each other's throats in terms of like racial hatred or biases. Like I've mentioned before on the show, there aren't these giant racial ghettos in this country, at least not even close to the degree of the United States. They're very different, and there's a lot more. I can never say this word. Homogeneity. I can never say that fucking word. Um, but yeah, I've seen it work. So I think that it's like you said, if you have the government pitting people against each other and starting to make this an us versus them issue, because it's
it's amazing how it works. It's amazing
yeah,
how it works so well. Yeah.
it's very effective, and politics in general seems to be just people finding new ways to manipulate the masses into doing what they need them to do, and
I
it,
started
it's
to read about this tactic, political tactic called divide and conquer. And when the politicians start to divide the population, they make it so if you divide a homogeneous group and you separate them into X and Z. So let's say I want to grab all of the voters from the Z portion. I first divide the homogeneous population, and then I say to the Z people, okay, you guys are separated right now. I'm by your side. So they take all of that support from there, from the small group that they just separated, and when they get elected, they start to get more moderate. They start to dilute their message to grab the people from X, to grab the people from other groups.
yep. Actually, that's what I've said for a while that I think Trump is going to do. I think if Trump got elected, that he would almost immediately start capitulating to the middle.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, he's going to be probably one of the first true middle presidents
Oh yeah,
ever
I could
in
see it.
America.
I can see it right
Yeah.
now. I don't know. It's interesting. I think that as far as I'm concerned, my ideal society operates on some simple bases, like you can't break any of the laws the society has set out. But if as long as your beliefs fall within the realm of the law, and you aren't using it to do loopholes, trying to get. I also don't really think I don't believe in tax exemption for any religious organization, but that's a separate issue, I guess. But as long as you're following the law, I have no problem with whatever you want to believe. And while I sympathize with the ideas, in fact, I've been watching a lot of anti-theist videos, and I find a lot of it, funny and entertaining. But for the sake of being, a cooperative individual, I don't go through my life being antagonistic anymore to people who are religious, because it just causes more problems than it possibly could solve to me.
What are your thoughts on? Because I see a lot of comments from Canadians saying, "Oh, you should elect Bernie Sanders," and I know we talked about this before, but it's a lot of Canadians that are saying, "Please, America, elect Bernie Sanders to make your country more like ours." And you were talking about
No,
that
no.
earlier.
I think the Canadians are afraid that if Trump wins, they'll have a lot of immigration from America because
Actually, well, I mean, it's weird. I'm probably one of the only Canadians that I've known that's a Trump supporter. And as far as the Bernie Sanders thing
Traitor.
goes, I think that Trump and Bernie Sanders are like two sides of a coin. They're very different. Not two sides of the same coin, because that's a bad analogy. That would say that they're similar. I would say that they're opposite sides of a spectrum, and I think they both represent an escape from the current establishment. So the person that I hate
I
most,
think that what you're trying to say is that Bernie and Trump want the same thing, but with opposite means to achieve it.
yeah, yeah,
Is that what you want to say?
yeah, something like that. And I think that my real dog in the fight is just don't elect Hillary, and I'll be happy.
Well, it is interesting because you have Trump, and the RNC has made it blatantly clear you cannot go a day without seeing a news article. It's just like, well, I mean, if Trump doesn't get 50%, we're going to have a brokered convention, and then, I mean, it's just whatever happens, happens. It would be such a shame.
Yeah, I don't want to
And
give
then
it
you
to
got the
Casey.
Democrats
No
just
votes.
throwing all the super delegates at Hillary.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Oh, it's so awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should remain on the topic, but like the only thing I like, I think Trump is just fun because like everyone is getting mad at him, like even people from the right, which I find hilarious. But yeah, whatever. I think we should remain on topic because we're going to American politics. But I don't think we'll be.
Yeah, so Gothic had a bunch of objections to what I said. So why don't you speak up?
That's more about multiculturalism. But yeah, it's fine.
Well, I could just read out what I thought. I mean, I think you compared ideas with cultures, and when you said that you're a multiculturalist, you meant in a way that you get to discuss different ideas from different cultures and so on. And I did object to that in that eventually all the cultures melt into the bigger one, and they lose their intrinsic value, the dominant component that drove the culture, the external culture.
Yeah, and they become a better culture.
Yeah, so it doesn't. They don't. Multiculturalism doesn't really make any sense. As in, it doesn't really bring new ideas, and the new ideas that they do bring eventually die
It
out.
brings argument, Gothic. It brings arguments to the table. It brings the discussion, which is very important.
Was that we don't need other cultures to discuss ideas. We need contact with them, but we don't need to integrate them within ours. We don't need to have multiculturalism. All we need is contact, and so on.
Oh yeah, but if you get contact from the same cultures all the time, you're not getting any new content, are you? You're
Well,
just
yeah.
getting more of the same. I mean, I'm against forced multiculturalism, but I see the worth in it because if you don't have a mixed culture in your homeland, I don't know.
I also don't necessarily think it's the best option. I think it's probably the most interesting option for one thing. I find that it's a lot more fun to be able. I've been to a few different cities. I haven't been very far, but I've been to a few different cities around, the U.S. and Canada, and the cities that I've been to that have more different like areas that you can go to. More specifically with Canada, different like Chinatown and Little Italy. They're nice, really cool, quaint, specific areas of the town, and I love those parts of the town. And I love they're like I said, they're not really ghettos. They're more like districts of this little subculture, and I think they're really cool. So I don't necessarily think it's the best. This is necessarily what every society should strive for. Idea. I just think it's. Go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to confirm your point. Actually, when you go back into history, all of the cities that were major port towns that had a lot of circulations of individuals before the Industrial Revolution, they were actually the melting pots of culturalism in the world. So, for example, Venice was always a place where you had a lot of culture and a lot of things going on that didn't actually was happening in the rest of the world, because there was just so many cultures in there just stepping by, that the things that advanced the civilization in Venice, for this example, are just amazing. And what the thing about globalism is that it brings people together from different parts of the world, makes the world smaller and shit. But what I'm trying to say here is that when the government does not force it, so when you don't have laws that enforce immigrants, like for example Merkel is doing with Germany, that they're enforcing immigration, when you don't actually enforce it and make it natural, for example, I think Donald Trump has a pretty natural stance on it. If you're not illegal, so what? You can come to the country. But if you're not legally in the country, you have to leave. I think that's a very perfect, valid stance.
I think the fact that people even object to that kind of blows my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it's basic laws. Like we were going over this.
Crazy.
Yeah, we were going over this the other day when I was looking at the laws of my country, for example, and I've actually come to an interesting point, and I know we're kind of getting off topic, but I think the culture fits in a little bit with religion, so we're good for now. I think that damn it, I lost my thought. We'll go back to what we were talking about before. Yeah, we'll go back to religion because I was kind of going off on a tangent.
We could move on talking about Trump's religion, Trump's Christianity, which is.
No, I don't. This is the thing with Trump. I think Trump said he's a Presbyterian, which is a Protestant denomination. But I mean, to be honest, I mean, I'd rather have. I mean, Trump also said stuff like, "I don't need forgiveness," which is pretty funny.
All right, let's try to stay away from the American politics.
No. But I mean, if you want to talk about Trump's religion, it's possible. I mean, I don't think it matters to Trump. But you have someone like Ted Cruz, where he's like an evangelical, and that matters to him a lot. But I think we're gonna go into American politics, which
Okay, I kind of wanted to bring something up.
Go ahead.
So I watched a few videos from an atheist YouTuber, goes by Lee Lemon. She's a smart gal. But there are some videos of hers which I wanted to address directly that I take some exception to, and those are her claims that that prayer is actively harmful to those who practice it, and her reasoning for this is largely that it encourages people not to do anything for themselves, for one thing, or gives them an inflated sense of responsibility to where they believe anything that bad happens to them is deserved for their sins. Now I wanted to get some of your opinions on that.
Well, I think that's interesting, but I think maybe the second point is more valid than the first one, in that I don't think it could be directly harmful for them in terms of making them. What was the first point again?
The first point was that it encourages people not to do anything for themselves. That their God will take care of it.
So I think, that's not really true, because I think if you look at religious people in general, they tend to. I mean, if you were to break it down and look at people who've accomplished things and great things that we would consider worthy of recognition in society, a lot, probably the vast majority of them are religious. So, even if, and probably the vast majority of them pray to some extent. And so even if they clearly weren't just not doing anything for themselves, they were clearly whether or not they had a false sense of what was, encouraging them or guiding them or forcing them or whatever it is, they still get things done. It's clear.
Right, that's one of the issues I guess I take with parts of the anti-theist position. I would consider her an anti-theist, at least.
Right. Okay.
Well, my biggest issue is that I've actually heard people, anti-theists, who have said that they think it should be made illegal to teach Christianity to children, and I think that's a very dangerous road to go by, where you have a government telling parents what they can't and can't teach their children, which is I think Dawkins endorsed this. Child psychologist who made this paper saying we should. I'm in favor of free speech, but I think we should ban Christianity or religion being taught to children. And I think that's very damaging to a free society in general. Because if you as a parent can't teach your children your religion, I think then you don't actually have free speech at that point, because the government is telling you what you can and can't teach your
Well,
children.
think
I
about
think
this
the most
from
hilarious
another.
part.
Alright,
Okay.
no, go ahead.
Okay. I think the most hilarious part about not being able to teach religion to your children is just remembering my senior class and trying to think about which one of the people I was graduating with were actually Christian.
Mhm.
It's just like, it's definitely less than 50%.
Well, yeah, that goes back to the point that I made earlier, is that the rise of secularism in the academic institutions. Like I said, I don't know about the U.S., but as far as Canada goes, if I had to make a rough guess of how many of my classmates were non-religious, it's probably 60-70%.
Yeah,
And
it's
even the ones who are, they're deists. They're not theists.
It's yeah, for me, yeah, it's in Belgium. It's like pretty much the reverse. Like in the U.S., it's sort of like it's a
Well,
weird position to take if you're religious, except if you're a Muslim, because Muslim, you have to accept those people. Christians,
oh yeah,
that's a
yeah.
weird position to take. But
It's the hypocrisy. However, Lenny,
Mhm.
imagine if they said that about Muslims, like you cannot teach your kid about Islam and so on. You cannot make him religious and so on.
Well,
In
I
order
would be against that.
well, I mean, if the parents go to a Wahhabi mosque,
Mhm.
they are taught very extremist views
Right.
and so on. They are basically pro-ISIS and so on.
Mhm.
Should the government do anything if they have kids? Should they
I don't
monitor
know.
them? Should they test them and so on? So you have to consider that argument from the other side of the coin.
Sure.
Very
So
important.
I think that's an interesting point, Gothic, and where I come at it from is, first of all, if that religion is in my country and it's teaching people things that are illegal, get the fuck out of my country. You have to be if your religion teaches things, it teaches to normalize things that are strictly illegal in my country, then you can't practice that religion. That's how I would say it.
Again, isn't homophobia illegal in Canada? So questioning homosexuality or questioning things and so on would be made illegal. I think there was a case in Sweden where kids were taken away because the parents were anti-immigration and so on. So there's a problem with that argument too, is that if the government decides to be very regressive and jail people for speech that they don't like, then the kids might be unfairly taken away. So the legality argument also has some flaws with it.
Wait, I don't see how that has a flaw with the legality argument. I mean, in the sense that if you're breaking one of the law, can you repeat that?
Well, for example, if criticizing immigrants is became illegal and so on, criticizing immigration, then these kids, um, the people that tell their kids that immigration is bad for these reasons and so on, their kids would be taken away by the state or just deported and so on. So that's my argument.
Well,
Uh,
look, Gothic, if you're in a country that has laws against stuff like that, then you have much bigger problems than religious freedom.
Yeah, I'm talking about like either my country or an ideal version of my country is what I'm kind of talking about. So yeah, I could see that being possible in a particular situation, but I think for the most part it would work if you have if I'm saying, if I was the fucking God Emperor of Canada, this is how it would go down. Nobody would be allowed to believe shit that teaches that is being taught. Like, you couldn't teach your kid, murder's okay, son. No, I would take your kid away. You can't teach your kids, you can beat up women, son. You can't do that. Like, I'm gonna fucking ban your religion if you're gonna teach that. That's just how it goes.
But the problem is, like in America, especially, we got the freedom of religion, and I don't know if they can't really change it and say, well, freedom of religion except Islam. You know, I just don't see that how it's possible.
Well, I think everybody here has a particular stronger hatred for Islam than Christianity for the most part, and
Not really a hatred, just a dislike.
dislike, what hatred, whatever word you want to use. The point is, we all have a larger apprehension for it than we do for Christianity, and I
Well,
think for obvious reasons.
and I wanted to jump in on that about the implications of like teaching your children. Like, I think it should be something where at least when they're, I'm just throwing this idea out there, like where at least they're like 18 or 20 or an adult or something, so that they learn about religion. I don't think, I truly agree that it should not be taught to children, and they shouldn't have, I truly believe that they shouldn't have like these schools to indoctrinate the children with religion just yet. I think it should be more of an informed decision and something when they get older. That's just the way I look at it.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, the problem with that is, for example, the schooling system in Belgium is very strong bent towards the progressivism. So, to some extent, what they're doing in those schools is actually, I don't like the word indoctrinating, but they're teaching kids a certain ideology as well. And this doesn't have to be religious in nature, in the sense that I mean, I think if you go to a public schooling system in Belgium and you're not somehow on the left, then the school failed you. But
What about
really bent towards one certain kind of political agenda. Sorry.
what about and this is more directed to specifically Pat and Lenny. What about creationism in a classroom? What do you guys think of that? And I mean, anybody can answer. I just
In a public classroom?
yeah,
Or
public classroom versus like my stance is can't be in
Is
public
it during
classroom.
a science class or a not
Which-
science class?
Okay, for this scenario, it's a science class. So it's a public classroom science class.
Mhm.
Is that acceptable, or should that be allowed?
Is there going to be like a whole chapter test on this, or is it just like 2 paragraphs in a book somewhere?
Let's say it's legitimately being presented as an alternative to evolution.
Oh. Well, in a public school and all that other shit that we just listed, then
All right, that's kind of where I'm at too. Private school, no problem with that.
I mean, in my country, we have. I mean, I was in a school in the middle of the Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and they all had their own schools. And what they did was, when they got science books, they literally, like, they took out black markers and took like giant portions out of it. And the same with whenever they had pictures of women who were a bit too scantily dressed, they just the black marker. No, actually, I saw some of those books, and
That's
but those schools are private, and and they're very much like the Jewish school. So in some sense, I have no issue with private schools.
Yeah, no, I think everybody here was okay with private schools. It was just the issue of because I've just been personally, I've been digging into watching
Right.
stuff about that
I mean,
recently.
I have no issue in the religious class them teaching the argument and then the other argument, but in the science class, I think it should be definitely not taught to children. I mean, to children. I mean, just not teach as a scientific. I mean, if you're simply going to, I mean, like I said, it doesn't matter for me. Even in religious class, they tell you, oh, so there's perspectives in Christianity that think creation is true, and in other things, that's all fine. I mean, I have no issue with that.
So I think we'll move on to a bigger question that's pretty interesting, and that is a question that's been posed at a lot of big debates and stuff, and that is religion a force for good or evil? And we'll use different terms than good and evil because that's just sort of me, making it sound fancy. What I really mean is religion generally good or generally bad? And by good and bad, I mean, helpful to humanity or detrimental to humanity.
Right.
So let's get some opinions on that.
It's clearly detrimental.
All right, so we got
Yeah.
one detrimental.
I'm neutral on the matter.
We got a neutral.
I think
Go ahead.
detrimental.
Lenny?
Some religions yes, some religions no.
Okay, so that's a sometimes.
Yes.
Smiles?
Oh yeah, but I think Smiles already answered. He said no. That's right.
Well,
did know.
I think all religions should be taught in schools at an equal basis, so they can take their own conclusion which one is the best. I think that's the best way to advance in
Yeah,
level.
I think that.
But I think it shouldn't be a specific topic. It should be a subtopic of history.
That's a good point. Yeah, because I was gonna say, like that would be an okay idea, but it would take up a lot of time in classrooms. So yeah, I think having it as a sub part of history or something, going, oh well, there's all these different belief systems across the world, and some people believe this for this reason and that reason, and maybe a chapter that'd be
That's
fun.
gonna take a long time.
Well,
No,
you can
it's not
summarize it.
that long, Lenny. When you put this into a natural process into the child before they reach college, there's a lot of stuff that they're teaching that is just garbage and can be replaced very easily. And when you put a children that is 10, 12 years old, and they reach maturity knowing what all religions are taught in the world, at least at the basic level, and they can at least know a little bit more in college. I don't know, it may be elective. I'm not sure. But for example, if I'm an engineer, I'm not sure if religion is going to help me build anything. If I'm
I
going to
think
be a
that-
coder, it's not going to. But I think for some school matter and for college matter, sorry, for some college courses, I think religion should be taught at least in the minimal
Is it going to be an
level.
anthropomorphical study, or is it going to be simply a study of doctrine? Because if it's going to be an anthropomorphical study, it's going to be very heavily bent towards atheism, because you're simply looking at people's behaviors in their religion and saying, oh, this religion was important.
No, I think it should be
Or
highly
just gonna look
just
at the
historical. I think it should be historical because when you put religion into a subtopic of history, what happens is there's a lot of stuff that happened for religion, and this is what happened when religions clash. This is how this religion was founded. This is the guy who founded the religion. This is what happened throughout history through the course of the evolution of the. I think when you teach religion through history, you get the most neutral stance that you can get.
Yeah.
Because when you put it into a
Right.
theological stance,
Yeah.
you're
The
going
problem
to
with
just
history is
you're going to highly. I think that the problem with theology is that it puts religion into a pedestal that it does not deserve.
Can I just
Okay.
add that this system actually exists in the United Kingdom? I actually have to go through RE lessons that are quite neutral towards all religions, so it does exist, and it's
Well,
I
Yeah.
think, Gothic, I wanted to kind of raise your point that you put in the chat. I think that your idea is terrible. Philosophy lessons on skepticism in schools to counter religious elements? No. And here's why. 5 years ago, I would have said yes. I say no now because of what I mentioned before about people's tendency to be biased and find something to replace their old dogma. That would quickly become very corrupt, if you ask me.
I fail how
That would quickly become feminism class 101.
I fail how scientific method can become corrupt when it's set in stone. Like literally.
Because how can it be corrupted? Look at fucking social sciences.
Yeah, but they don't use.
But they claim to, and they get a lot of the credibility that a lot of the other scientists especially because this capitulation.
That's not the argument against the method itself. It's the argument against social sciences.
But skepticism isn't a science. I mean, if you want to say
You
we
can
should
teach
apply the
someone to
scientific,
be skeptical.
yeah,
You can't
but
teach that.
if we want to say let's teach people to use the scientific method and apply it to pretty much everything in their life, I can agree with that. But saying let's teach skepticism in contrast to religious elements sounds like atheism class, which will become feminism class
Well,
to me.
scientific method doesn't teach you how to live, so it can't be applied to
No,
everything.
I know that's what.
So that would be ethics, or and the Greeks can help you with that, I suppose.
My problem with all of this,
one
though-
issue
Well,
with, okay, thank you. I think one issue with teaching religion only through the idea of anthropology or history is I believe I think this too if I wasn't religious, but if you have people that believe something, their beliefs will affect you positively or negatively. Therefore, it's important to know the philosophy of those beliefs and not just, oh, I don't know how that society was structured and all that stuff.
And my problem with all of this is that if you have these college professors or high school teachers or whatever teaching these classes, what are they going to be? I know that there's a Muslim woman that teaches Middle Eastern studies and Islam, and she had a great bias toward it. And same thing with like Christian professors when they teach theology. They have a great bias to what they truly believe, and the way they're presenting the religion, it's like they're almost in a way converting them. And there's no way to measure that. There's no way to tell a professor, "Oh, you're being too biased," and everything like that. There's no way you can like get a professor to realize that he's being biased. So that's my only issue.
See, I wouldn't say there's any reform needed in the schools necessarily, but my suggestion would be rather that parents teach their children to recognize religious thinking, and not necessarily to combat religion, but when religious thinking is applied to ideologies like Marxism, for example, it that's when it becomes very dangerous, very dangerous. Um, and I think recognize religious thinking would not only see a decrease in religions, but also probably a decrease in rabid ideologues.
It's possible.
Well, I mean, I'm just wondering, is there a particular reason we need a decline in religion specifically? I'm just wondering why we
I
should.
don't think so necessarily. I don't think so necessarily. Some might, but I think it's more. Well, look, some people need religion on an emotional basis, and I don't blame them for that.
Well, I would
Not
say
function
that.
some kind of
Sorry,
divine authority to lead
Val. I
them.
think is Val cutting up for anybody else, or is it just me?
I would call it cut off for me in
Yeah,
like 2 seconds.
about 80% audible, 20% not. So it's not too
Okay.
bad.
Yeah, so Val, you might want to check your mic. We got most of what you said though, but you might want to check your mic because you're cutting in and out a little bit. But I think that it's interesting. I wouldn't say that we necessarily need a decrease in religion, but we need an increase in scientific literacy. I think that's the point that we need to take home. That's what's most important to me anyway, because
Right.
I don't. Go ahead, Lenny.
Yeah, I have no problem with scientific literacy. There's only one problem I have is that there many people who would see themselves as scientific. They also fall into like traps of pseudoscience, and I think you'd have to analyze those things as well because those things definitely exist. There are a lot of people who spout a lot of nonsense about science as well.
True, but I also think that there's a lot of people that, and I would include myself in this following definition, that talk a lot of shit about science that they don't think that doesn't conform to their worldview, and they get very defensive, and they even try to dismiss it and they try to disprove it, but without sounding like an appeal to authority, it's almost essentially impossible to accurately disprove something that's established fact in scientific
Well, I mean, it
media
has happened. It has happened.
without I wasn't hold on without
Sorry.
getting the proper credentials
Mhm.
and then going through the process of forming a hypothesis, having a
Right.
theory, and getting it recognized as, and having it tested over and over again until it's vigorously shown to be true. You
Mhm.
can't just in an hour conversation say, oh well, this and that. It's not true.
No,
So
sure.
I just
No. When I'm referring to pseudoscience, I'm not necessarily referring to things that have gone through all the process. Simply stuff people think about science, which is like just not true.
And
That's
of
the only
course,
check.
if we need to bring science into religion, kind of like what Alan was talking about then earlier with what was that religion's name? That was kind of like voodoo.
In Brazil.
In Brazil, yeah.
Yeah, what was that religion's name?
The religion?
Yeah. Began with a B.
Ubanda. It's
Ubanda.
Ubanda. Yeah.
There we go. I'm assuming they have practices like you were talking about, different rituals and spells
Yeah.
and whatnot. And of course, if these are true or not, even if they were, I don't know, let's say lose money for this person's spell. You would have to get someone to cast the spell, and then you have to follow around the test subject, and then you have to try to justify the
You know what I
reasoning of
believe?
him gaining or losing money because of the spell. So it would be super hard to prove scientific. You need a large sample size of hundreds of thousands.
I highly believe in the power of suggestion.
Yeah.
So if the person who believes he's attacked by a spell, I think that the effect is going to be higher than the person that does not believe. I
Yeah.
think it's highly based off personal suggestion than anything else. So if you cast a spell for someone, voodoo, and then 3 years later they get cancer, they're going to say, "Oh, it's the curse." Oh, come on, dude. Give me a fucking break.
So one way that you'd have to go about this is the person who's getting the spell set on them does not know that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Either way, it would be really hard to prove scientifically. So I'm not saying it can't be done, but there need to be people willing to put in the work.
Well, I mean, if you get a statistical analysis, it's obvious that it's going to be nil. You're not going to find any difference whatsoever. But the person that are going to believe that they're affected are always going to be the most affected. It's obvious.
That's why
It's,
in such
yeah.
a study, you would have to have the subject not know what's going on.
All right, let's kind of drive back to the original question, and I want to get an answer and an elaboration from everybody. So the
Mhm.
question was, is religion a force for good or bad? So we're just gonna go down the line. We're gonna start with Val. Val?
I think we pretty much did this with everyone.
I want to hear it. Well, we got an answer, but we didn't get an elaboration.
Uh,
Is Val there?
No, she's not.
All right. Well, Alan.
I think it's good, generally good, but it gets to a point where if you get to a point where it's too exacerbated, it's going to be harmful like anything else. I believe that religion itself, as people get more and more knowledgeable about the world, it tends to fade, and I think that people need to know more about all religions, not just the religion that they follow. And when you do it, you naturally become more skeptical, and you naturally become less religious, because when you understand what religion is all about, you feel like it's not just about believing and stuff. It's all a core of tenets that are made to manipulate people into believing, so for good or for bad. So when you tend to get into this point, it doesn't really matter to you anymore. If people are going to get good things out of religion, I mean, there's a lot of churches, there's a lot of religions out there that do good around the world, and there are a lot of religions that do bad. I mean, we got Islam on the one hand, we got Catholicism on the other, we got Buddhism, we got all sorts of religions doing good stuff and doing bad stuff. It's just a matter of separating what's good and bad. And what I think that being forceful with it, like it's happening with the immigrants in Europe, it's a clear example that when you force this into a society, it gets overblown really fast.
Okay. What about Pat?
I don't know. Religion's not good. It's not bad. I mean, we can't prove that anybody would or wouldn't do something if they didn't have X religion. It'll be really hard. So I can't really say one way or another. Nonetheless, it is important, like Alan said, to know about religions that you do not believe in. So then, when there's a huge Mormon army marching onto Missouri, you'll know it's to recapture the city of Independence, Missouri.
All right, cool. What about Lenny?
I think certain religions were important to like the development of in the history of Europe and the development of Europe, and to some extent to America. So, well, I mean, I think some religions are good and other religions are bad, meaning that I think religions which are founded on the basis of slaughtering infidels are kind of worse than religions who, they killed a lot of people in history, but they don't necessarily, their foundation is necessarily on the slaughtering of infidels. So yeah, I think Christianity, for example, was important for Europe, and you could say, it was a bunch of indoctrination. But I think it was important for like you said, a lot of people we would consider like giants of Western civilization. A lot of them were inspired by Christianity, and to some extent also were Christians. So to some extent, I do think Christianity was important and good for the West. Yeah, I think that's my position.
Okay. And Smiles?
Well, like I don't like the whole generalization on what's a good religion and what's a bad religion, because it's all going to be subjective at the end of the day, on what's good and what's bad. Because in Islam, you do have some good teachings. You do
I
have some.
disagree with that. I have to disagree with that because when you read into the Quran, there's a lot of shit that it's very, very bad, and there's little that's good.
But you can argue the
It's
same
just a
thing.
simple fact of balancing what's good and bad from each religion, and there's a lot of religions that teach a lot of more good stuff than the bad stuff. And
But
I think that when a religion forces you to believe on itself more than the other, I think it starts to get into a problem. And Catholicism does that. It teaches into internalizing all of the religion for yourself and to progressing yourself towards the religion, like Islam does. But when you compare Catholicism, that it's a religion of peace, that it's a religion that teaches you to be merciful towards everyone, and when you compare it to Islam, where it's slaughter or infidels, it's the distinction is just too big to ignore, dude.
Now, obviously,
No.
so when I said the foundation is slaughtering infidels, I'm not. Obviously, there are a lot of.
The Quran is based
I
off
know
that.
there are like very peaceful schools of
But
Islam, but
you're
there is
fucking right,
domination.
dude. But here's the thing, you're fucking right. You're right. When you read the Quran, only the initial chapters are actually more bland, and when you start to go towards the end, it gets into a fucking shit fest. You start to read something that looks like more art of war than something like a religion. Kill
All right.
infidels. It's
what
no mutual meaning.
We're gonna come back to this real quick, but just to draw attention to the fact that Sandre has joined us. What's up, Sandre?
Oh, please don't remind me that I'm hanging out with you losers.
So, assuming you've been listening at all, we're talking about religion. So,
No shit, Sherlock.
yeah, obviously. So, you want to give us a little bit of a background on what you like? What were you raised in terms of your religion, and what's your stand now?
Well, here in Swedistan, there's only one true religion, and it starts with F. No, but seriously, we aren't very religious as a norm here. My mother is a Christian, but yeah, Christianity was never really forced on me in that sense. I realized that I wasn't a believer already when I was like 7 years old. So already at the age of 7, I realized that I was an atheist. Of course, I didn't know as a kid the name for what I was, but I did know that I lacked faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So, at this point, we're kind of like discussing what do you think about like religion being in terms of it being a force for good or a force for bad, and we've obviously gone over the fact that good and bad is very subjective, but the way I defined it was good meaning beneficial to the humanity and detrimental to humanity. So do you think it's very broad, but do you think that religion in general is more helpful or more detrimental?
Detrimental.
Okay, and elaborate a little bit.
Well, there are some good things in certain religions. I mean, one shouldn't, think of these things as, in the terms of black and white. But when you take an objective look at things, you sort of realize that all the positive sides of this religious dogma, you might as well replace with other forms of activities and other forms of philosophies. I mean, everything that is beneficial with religion, you can essentially emulate with other means as well. So the way I see it, there's just no justification for religion, if I'm going to be honest.
We were discussing that. I brought out the point that the I said before, I'm going to repeat it because it's going to sound a little blunt, but the people that are just too stupid to get into the matters of knowing the world and just too lazy to do their own research and to look into the matters of how things work, they're going to pull into religion as their escape towards rationalizing things. And when you don't have religion, they are just going to pull that from somewhere else. And for me, the main point of religion is to pull that mass that's just too ignorant to look into something that it's basic rationalism, and to actually, when you lose that thing, they just go somewhere else, and you never know what they're going for when you lose that kind of stuff. But that's just me in my third world country. I mean, when you're in the first world, I'm in Canada, in USA, in Europe, it's obviously different. So you get things like, for example, Lenny's saying that 80% of the college students that he knows are atheists because they know better. They know that they don't need religion to better themselves. But when you get into a point where you get a mass of people that are just too ignorant to know better, I think religion is a good escape because it makes them more comfortable in a way. But there's a lot of people that are going to use it for bad, obviously. And it's a matter of balancing what's good and bad and makes good religions and bad religions. And we already discussed which one is good and which one is bad.
I think there's a massive bias here on what's a good religion and what's a bad religion because I believe, it all your morals come from a lack of empathy. It's not like you're learning to be a good person from Catholicism. Of course, I make that distinction that Christianity, yeah, it's better than Islam. I always make that distinction. But I also say you can learn good things from Islam. People think they learn good things from Islam, but actually it's just a lack of empathy. And I don't think that if you take away religion, it doesn't matter which religion it is, if you teach people to compassion and morals and even spirituality without religion, they can learn to be better people. And it's not necessarily that they have to look toward an old book or an ancient book. So I just wanted to make that distinction real quick. I think it's extremely biased to say, oh, there's a good religion and there's a bad religion. I understand Islam is the worst out of them, but if you're going to force that on people, that idea, I think that's very dangerous.
To be perfectly honest, I think the most sympathetic people are also the least religious people because, well, it's sort of like you said, let's see now, Ra, or whatever the fuck you're called.
You can't kick me from this stream right now. You're fucked. You're stuck here until you quit from my arguments, or you just can't eat my shit, bitch.
You do realize that me and dogs, we don't really go together too well.
Oh, you're a cat person.
No, I actually have a dog, but
oh, you don't like him.
He's not the one that I treat other dogs like.
He's not the dog that he fucks, unfortunately.
Yeah, pretty much.
Go on, Sandre.
Anyway, jokes aside, my point is, it's sort of like you said earlier that most people just don't care enough, or in some cases aren't even capable of quite understanding rational thought, or they're just fucking lazy. I mean, and here you have a dogma in a religion that is prepackaged and gives you a lot of morals for, without any effort from your part. All you have to do is link your ego to this dogma, and voila, you get to feel righteous, and feel like you have a purpose, and you may even join a congregation of some kind, and all of a sudden you're in a community. You get to feel like part of a team, but you haven't actually matured in any way. You're not actually any wiser by doing this. It's all just an illusion. And if you don't have this religious dogma, well, you're shit out of luck. You will just have to sympathize with people. Okay, you will have to use your empathy and use your sense of rationality to try and identify with people. And I've actually
you make it sound easier than it actually is. It's not very easy for most of people to reach into that level, to push into this level of rationality, into sympathy with others, especially when you're into such a low grade of education that in
No,
most
but
poor
that's my
countries.
point, you idiot.
Which is your point?
Well, gee, what the fuck is wrong with this guy?
He's
What
Brazilian.
the fuck's wrong with you? I'm disagreeing with the point that when you get into a point of higher education, it gets easier to distance yourself from religion. When you get into a point where the people are less educated, they're going to pull their rationality towards something else, which is if there's no religion, they're going to push into something else.
I
I see now. I see. Okay, I see.
Okay.
My point is that it's very true that for some individuals they will just seek to another form of dogma. It might be a political dogma then instead. But my point is though, okay, there's a reason why people tend to prefer maybe a religion of some kind, maybe be a Christian rather than a Scientologist. It's those people that I'm talking about now, and they are the majority of the religious. I mean, even within the religious.
Are you saying that Scientologists are the majority of religious people?
think what he's saying
No, you idiot.
Please explain.
I'm trying. I
Try
mean,
harder,
do
bitch.
you
Come
do you
on.
not have any sense of? Do you have any listening comprehension skills?
Well, I do.
Well, obviously not. I'm trying to explain to you here that the majority of religious people are not fucking extremists. In other words, I cannot, by definition, argue that most religious people are Scientologists. Now, can I?
Okay, go ahead. No, you can't.
For fuck's sake. Oh, God. Okay. So what I'm trying to tell you is that, yes, for some individuals, the minority of religious people, they will probably just find some other dogma. And you know what? That's fine, okay, because they are a fucking minority. But the vast majority of religious people aren't actually extremists. They're not actually fundamentalists. They are actually capable of being rational and will not fall into some other dogma instead.
Can I ask you something really quick?
Yeah, sure.
Do you agree that there are religions that breed more extremists than the others?
Yeah, of course, of course.
So, do you agree that extremism is a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean the mindset that you are infallible in any way, it's a very dangerous mindset. Yes.
Which is more dangerous? A Buddhist extremist, a Hinduist extremist, a Catholic extremist, or a Muslim extremist in general?
Well, okay, thanks for adding that in general, because in general, I would say that Muslims
statistically speaking, we don't have much Buddhist bombers and Hinduist extremist bombers around the world, do we?
No, you're right, but yeah, generally speaking, I would say Muslims.
Okay, so we can draw this as an argument that some religions are fundamentally worse than others on the basis that if this religion breeds more extremism than the others, and there are more extremists that are dangerous to the world in this religion and the others they don't, we can separate those religions that need reformation or need to be refought than the other ones, right?
Well, I want to hear from Smiles.
One thing we have to weed out if we did that we'd have to find the amount of people that would still be extreme in their actions even without that religion. So let's say Church A has 30 extremists per 10,000 people. Now, if the same 10,000 people didn't exist in a church, how many of them would be extreme?
Uh, who knows?
Oh well, I just wanted to say like I know I recognize that Islam produces the most extremists, and I'm the last person to defend Islam, right? But at the same time, you still have to realize that Christians, when children are indoctrinated with Christianity, and there's a lot of studies, going against this and everything, but there are studies that it says that it reduces critical thinking, and you have to realize that there are still 6,000 KKK members today, and I know, there's argument KKK has nothing to do with Christianity, but there's still some verses in there that they get inspiration from, and there are still inspirational verses to a lot of extremists. It doesn't matter what religion it is.
I think that lends kind of to the point that we were discussing this earlier in that I mentioned that people have this innate bias and they'll tend to find this cognitive dissonance in whatever it is, and you might look at one religion and find that it doesn't breed as much extremism, but comparatively, if you actually read the Quran next to the Bible, it's not like the Quran is like hundreds of times more violent. They're pretty similar in terms of the violence they promote. It comes down to will the people actually apply that, and I think that has to do with so many different factors, and it's just
the Quran has a specific target to it. It tells you who are the unbelievers and everything. And I admit, Christianity, it's more parable writing and everything like that. But the point of the topic was, are you anti-theist? Does religion bring good or not? And I just say it doesn't matter what the religious texts are, especially from these Abrahamic faiths. I still see it as detrimental.
I think another issue with pulling stuff out of books like the KKK would do, or whoever, is that you can not be religious, and I can also pull things out of, I don't know, my red book from Mao, or something like that, and that's not a religious text.
Yeah, but I don't really see that happening as much as religious people. I don't know if anybody has something to object to that. But.
Well, I think that
the Cultural Revolution was pretty nasty. I think it was definitely a lot more nastiness in a really short period of time.
I thought there was more to that, Pat, honestly. But I don't know.
There's much more to that. When people advocate to anti-theism, I think they should focus on the ones that are bringing most harm to the world. Because when you try to destroy, when you put not destroy religion, it's not my point, sorry, it's a wrong choice of words. What I'm trying to say is that I think there should be priorities if you're going to pull an anti-theist stance. So if you're anti-theist and you believe that Christianity is wrong, okay, you believe all religion is wrong and you should not practice any religion, okay, that's fine. But when you start with the religions that are less harmful to the world, or less harmful to people in general, I mean statistically speaking, because you can take for granted that all there are cases of exceptions in all groups, obviously, but I just mean in a general way. You have to take into priority you have to prioritize those that are doing the most harm, because otherwise you're doing a lot of effort to destroy something that it's not actually causing the most harm.
Well,
of course, I acknowledge that. Of course, I say communism, is like a really, really bad idea, but I still take the stance that religion is bad as well. I think you can do both.
Well,
I think the problem isn't really. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly clear here. I know the topic is religion, but really, the way I see it, it's not really the case that religion religion itself is in any way some kind of unique problem. The problem is rather just dogma.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Blind dogma that doesn't rely on any kind of verifiable evidence.
Yeah, that and like I was mentioning this earlier, is that I think that people have these cognitive dissonances between, having something that's completely incompatible with what they like. They could be smart in a bunch of areas, be a math genius, and then they believe that the world is 6,000 years old or whatever. And I think that these tendencies to go towards these cognitive biases are present in everybody, and the degree to which they manifest are different in each person. But I think it happens in everything, and the goal should be to increase scientific literacy and minimize the effect of those biases.
When you do that, you destroy dogma automatically. You don't have to attack dogma directly.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you don't have to fight dogma directly if you put scientific evidence and rationality towards to increase your self awareness for religion.
But the truth is that you can't like implement scientific literacy everywhere in an instant. People, they're going to have to realize. I don't see why anyone would oppose anti-theism. In some parts of the world, maybe someone comes across a YouTube video against religion. I don't see a problem in that.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, here's the thing. We can talk all we want about, long-term solutions for the problem of dogma, but there are a lot of issues that are pressing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the only, I mean, like, it's sort of saying that, oh, well, this forest fire has caused us to take preventive measures so we don't have forest fires in the future. Well, there's a forest fire right now, and it's gonna by itself make sure that there aren't any forest fires within the next 50 years because there won't be any trees left. So, I mean,
Are you applying that to like Islam? Are you saying?
No, not just Islam. I mean, religion, regardless. And again, just let me point this out now. Even within the religious, there are nuances. But I do think that religion, as it is a dogma itself is something that needs to be eradicated. Now, there are ways of doing that, but I can tell you that it has to be through not just passive means in long term, but you can also attack it directly. Just make sure that you don't actually attack the person, okay? Because nothing will do more disservice to getting rid of dogma than to hurl ad hominems at religious people. You should attack their religion. And here's why. Because at least then, if you keep doing that, there will be less of a tendency to for these religious individuals to try and go against democracy and try to demand that their religious values are somehow forced upon others. At least that will humble the religious a bit. And I mean, the reason that we don't see many humble Muslims is because there is a political correctness and a social stigma that prevents people from attacking Islam directly. There are some individuals who are very vocal and quite famous on the internet who do that, but there's not enough people who are, and that's why Islam is still a problem. The only way to, right now, deal with the kind of dogma that we see is to attack the religion. At least that will eventually humble people enough that they will realize that they're not the nougaty center of the fucking universe.
Do we have any objections from our religious folk? I'm sure we do. Lenny, Pat, no, nothing?
I think there's a bias.
I'm playing shit
Islam,
for you.
Yeah, I want to get a
No,
little
but
bit
I
more
mean,
from Ryan
I'm
Pat.
just
Have a humble
clarifying my
bundle.
position on this. Is that the position I took on religion? I'm not saying Christianity is inherently good and Islam is inherently bad. I'm simply pointing out that I think contextually, in the context of European history, I don't think it was all bad when it came to Christianity. That's my point. And with Islam, I think contextually now it's very bad because I think Islam and the West simply are not compatible with each other. Whether or not Islam is inherently bad, that's possible, but I'm not going to smear every Muslim as inherently bad. I would never do that. The sects of the religion I think are inherently bad. Not probably. I mean, I have no issues with. I forgot what's the strain of Islam that's. I forgot the name. Like the people who are allowed to drink alcohol. I think inverted will know. Whatever. But yeah, I don't know. Um, um,
Well, I feel like I want to hear kind of from Pat. I wish Pat would jump in because I'm sure that I
I
don't
mean,
want to.
I totally agree that
As
ad
much as I
hominem
agree
attacks
with.
don't get anyone anywhere.
Right. Well, I mean, as much as I agree with a lot of what is being said, I do want to avoid an echo chamber. So I want to hear more
I think
objections.
one thing that should be done is if we want to bring a more scientific perspective to religion, then the scientific community also has to participate in scientific studies of religions.
I agree.
Yeah, like what we were talking about earlier with voodoo-like spells and whatnot.
Absolutely. I think that a vigorous application of the scientific method to religious practices would be very useful for everybody.
Yeah. And it seems to get scoffed at too much. It's like, well, I mean, unless we're gonna do a lot more stuff, then scoffing isn't going to get us anywhere unless we, do more studies and gather more evidence.
Yeah, as much as I might agree with the scoffing in terms of I would probably think that the notions are ridiculous, I think that enough people believe them and that it's a legitimate um, thing to spend your time on to really find out if it's true. And I don't know. I think that the reason I've drifted from being an anti-theist to being apatheist is because of this era of intellectual superiority that I see a lot of atheists going off of, and a lot of it came from the atheism plus bullshit and the whole takeover of the regresses. So as far as I'm concerned, some of my best friends are religious people. So I don't. And I used to, actively be antagonistic towards religious people in my day-to-day life, and it didn't get me anywhere. It just got me more friendships broken. So I've learned that it's more productive in general, regardless of what might be best for humanity in terms of, like, I mean, if you could snap your fingers and make everybody non-religious tomorrow, yeah, maybe things would get better. But that's not the case. You can't do that. So I think for the sake of practicality, you have to be, not you don't have to capitulate to these people, like we were discussing. You shouldn't teach anything that is unscientific in a public school classroom that is devoted to scientific studies. Keep that in the private schools. But as far as believe what you want to believe, and I also don't think there should be a tax exemption. I think that state should be completely separated from church. I don't know what the case is in Canada, though. I don't know. I think this churches have tax exemption here. I'm not sure.
Well, one issue with that is, at least in America, since religions are right, just because something's not taxed doesn't mean that it's in the government. So we have freedom of religion, and we have things like being able to vote, and there used to be poll taxes, and those have been deemed unconstitutional because you can't force people to pay a finer tax to practice their right.
Mm. Well, I don't know. I think it's a silly idea to even obviously to have to pay for your fucking religious
I
rights,
mean,
but
they don't make profit.
Right.
Yeah, so we have non-profit organizations.
Okay. I don't. Wait a minute. They do make profit.
No, you may have a surplus one year, but that's not a profit. It's not like redistributed to shareholders or something.
Okay, but where does the money come from to pay for the church?
That's not profit.
Okay,
Now,
but
if I have a bakery and it costs me $100,000 a year to run the bakery, and I make $100,000 in revenue, I have $0 in profit because
but
all the costs went to running the bakery.
you don't
You
pay.
break even. Yeah.
Do or churches pay taxes or not taxes? Pay rent for the building?
And if they don't own the property, then whoever owns the property may require
There,
them to pay rent.
there's a whole structure to keeping those churches up that costs money to the people that run the churches. So they try to run a zero-sum thing where all of the extra money goes to the center of the churches. So, for example, there is a church here in Brazil that taxes all of the people who are in the church 10% of their earnings every month.
Yeah.
That's a true story. You get taxed. Yeah, you got church tax. And this 10% goes to build new churches, goes to build new stuff, goes to make some kind of pharaonic monuments to the religion and shit.
Well, okay, I'm gonna get some shit for this. I know I'm gonna get a lot of shit for this, but what is the reason? I mean, we have money, and we're gonna spend it on new garments for the fucking priest, as opposed to sending it to people who need food.
Well, the church, obviously, if you're going to have a church, you need a church, so that's a building.
You know what they
It's gonna
say
need
about it?
heat.
I'm
It's
gonna
gonna
bring
need
a good
heat
point here.
electricity.
I'm gonna
If
bring
your
a good
church
point.
is going to have a priest, then usually priests get paid like, well, it all depends on the state, obviously, but it's like $30,000, so not a crap ton of money. And they'll get a clothing statement if we're talking about like Catholic churches and priests. We're talking about different Protestant groups, then your church hires a priest.
Helicopters, mansions,
Yeah. I mean, if we want to
$30,000 cupboards.
go into the word of faith televangelist
Yeah,
movement,
then you'll get some.
Yeah, exactly. 400,000
Yeah, but for
cars.
example, in Eastern Europe, there are a few countries. I think one country that springs up to my mind is Austria, which you actually have to pay a specific tax for being a member of a church. It's called church tax, and I think it's about 2%. Like you have to pay 2% in tax if, like, you're a Christian or something. And that has existed. And that's also an alternative, I suppose, that they have in those countries, which is
Yeah, Lenny, but there's a thing called tithe. I think it's tithe in English.
Tithe, yeah.
Tithe? Yeah, it's tithe.
Well, that
And there's a
is
thing called tithe, and there's a thing called tax, church tax. And
Right.
so, for example, if the church says that I should tithe, it's not obligatory. It's something that it helps the church. I'm not going to fucking hell for not tithing the church, at least now. But there are religions
And
that
at least
say
you're not
that you
gonna go to
have to
jail.
donate because it's church tax. It's not tithing.
So
they call it tithe, but if I don't donate, I get kicked out of the church.
It's interesting. So what I'm seeing in Austria, the church tax was actually implemented by Adolf Hitler. That's in 1939.
Makes sense.
So I'm sorry, but that's where it's come from. That's where it's come from in Austria.
My point is that I just think there are things that we could be spending our money on that are better than this.
Well, but it's not our money; it's individual people's money.
Well, the government money that's being given to the church for the purposes.
No government money is being given to the church. The churches just aren't paying taxes because they have no income.
All right, whatever. I'll accept that for the time being until I look further into it. But we're coming up on the 2-hour mark, so we're gonna kind of get some closing statements, and then we're gonna wrap things up. So let's go down the line, and we're gonna get closing statements on the subject of religion and ideologies in general. So Val, start us off if you're there.
Well, see, the thing is, I wouldn't classify religion as good or bad based on its impact upon humanity as a whole, but rather on its impact to individual people. To some people, religion is a good thing. To others, it leads to extremism or,
You cut out, Val.
intolerance. Something you have to look at it, I think, an individual basis. And there
Oh,
are arguments.
Okay. Sorry, you're cutting out, Val.
Some religions being better than others, but oh,
We'll come
point-
back to you, okay?
okay.
Just see if you can fix your mic. We'll come back to you. Alan, go ahead. Alan?
Oh, fuck. Yeah, my microphone was muted. So, yeah, my arguments were said already. I mean, there's good religions, there are bad religions, and most of the consensus that we got here is that Islamism is a bad religion because it breeds extremism, which in turn is a bad thing regardless of the religion. And we are already in terms that the most dangerous extremists in the world are the Islamists and so forth. I don't think we can develop any further than that.
Pat? Man, you guys with the time on calling you. Pat.
Okay. I don't know. This is my ending statement. It goes something like this. Religion's alright. It could be worse. A lot of things are correlated with it. Probably aren't because of religion. Yada, yada, yada. Look up financial statements and balance sheets for taxes.
Okay. Lenny?
Good point.
Which I mean, I agree with Val partly. I think it's very important for the individual conscience. Oh no, not very important, but I mean, it's interesting to see the effects on it. But like I said before, I think contextually, I think Christianity was not all bad in Europe and in the West, and there were obviously bad elements of it, which were pretty totalitarian at that time. But yeah, for me, it's simply I don't know. It's mostly contextual in which I see it as good and as bad in cases. I don't think it's inherently evil. Although you might say, it's inherently anti-intellectual, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay. And Smiles?
Well, I don't claim to know everything, and I stick by my stance, and I think time will only tell. I don't think, no matter how much we talk about it, nothing is going to change. Only if we have statistics and we show how religion is detrimental to our life. I just think that's the only way to prove it. I think there's a lot of corruption if you base, if you say all our morality and empathy comes from religion. I don't agree with that, and time will tell. That's it.
All right, and finally, Gothic, until we get back to Val, actually. So, sorry, not finally. Gothic?
Well, I think that religion is a bad thing in modern days. We can see that with the God of the Gaps argument. Basically, if science cannot explain anything, the religious people just say that God must have did it, and so on. But once it does, they have to shift the goalposts and so on. So they are basically retarding the progress of the civilization. I fail to see how the good elements of religion can't be substituted by a secular means. By secular means, I mean religion was a good thing back in the past. Superstitious belief was actually a good thing for the survival of the species back in the caveman times and so on, because it's easier to get a mass of peasants with torches using religious fervor rather than using scientific reasoning. So thanks to superstition, we have survived as a species. And one more thing about Islam and so on. When we talk about Islamic extremists, what does that actually mean? When we compare Muslim beliefs compared to Christian beliefs in modern society, what a typical Muslim believes is actually considered extremist by a Christian. So it's a rather vague point and so on.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't like the word extremist in general, but whatever.
So we can't, yeah.
All right. Okay. So, Val, you fixed your mic by chance?
I'm just gonna sum up my points by saying praise Mormon Jesus,
All right. That's
and
perfect.
I'm gonna be watching God's Not Dead too
Oh,
for a good laugh.
That's
brilliant.
pretty awesome,
Leave your
actually.
Mormon underwear on, Val.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I'd like to especially thank Smiles for joining us again. We'll see you guys soon, and take it easy. Peace out.